The recording device clicked on with a soft hum that filled the white, sterile room. Commander Zixtela shifted his forearms nervously as he looked across the metal table at the human woman sitting opposite him. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and her brown eyes watched him with careful attention. She wore a plain blue uniform with no weapons visible. "Please state your name and rank for the record," Dr. Elena Rodriguez said in a calm voice. Her fingers moved over a small tablet as she spoke. "Commander Zixtela of the 47th Assault Fleet, Kethmori Imperial Navy," he replied. His voice carried a strange musical quality that came from his species' dual vocal cords. The crystalline plates covering his body caught the harsh light, and through rainbow patterns on the walls, Captain Jake Morrison sat quietly in the corner of the room. The human liaison officer had said very little since bringing the alien commander to this neutral space station. His presence was meant to make sure both sides followed the peace treaty rules during these interviews. "Thank you, Commander," Elena said as she made notes on her tablet. "As you know, I am Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the Galactic Peace Archives. We are collecting testimonies from military leaders on both sides of the recent conflict. Your cooperation will help future generations understand what happened during the war." Zixtela's three eyes blinked in sequence as he processed her words. The middle eye stayed focused on her face while the other two scanned the room for threats. It was an old habit from his military days that he could not shake. "I agreed to this interview because I believe the galaxy needs to know the truth about your species," he said slowly. "What I witnessed during the war changed everything I thought I knew about warfare and survival." Elena leaned forward slightly. "Can you tell us about your first encounter with humans? What were your initial expectations?" The commander's crystalline skin darkened slightly, a sign of distress among his people. The Coalition High Command briefed us that humans were a primitive species that had barely achieved faster than light travel. We expected them to surrender quickly when faced with our superior technology and numbers. And what happened instead? Zixtela was quiet for a long moment. His four hands moved restlessly on the table surface. "We learned that technology means nothing when facing a species that refuses to accept defeat. Your people fought with a determination that terrified veteran soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds." Captain Morrison shifted in his chair but remained silent. Elena noticed the slight movement but kept her attention on the alien commander. "I commanded a battle fleet of 300 ships," Zixtela continued. "We had plasma cannons that could melt mountains and shield generators that could deflect asteroids. Our soldiers wore armor that made them nearly invulnerable to primitive weapons. We thought the war would last maybe 6 months. How long did it actually last?" Elena asked. 4 years, the commander replied. 4 years of the most brutal fighting the galaxy has ever seen. And in the end, we won only because we were willing to commit genocide. Even then, I am not sure we truly won." Elena made more notes on her tablet. "What do you mean by that?" "Your species did something to us during that war," Zixtela said. "Something that changed how we think about conflict and survival. Many of my fellow commanders never recovered from what they witnessed. Some still wake up screaming from nightmares about human tactics." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Elena could see that the alien commander was struggling with difficult memories. "Would you like to take a break?" she asked gently. "No," Zixtela said firmly. "These stories need to be told. The galaxy needs to understand what your species is capable of when pushed to desperation." Elena nodded and prepared to continue taking notes. "Please start wherever you feel comfortable. I will begin with our first major engagement," the commander said. "The Siege of New Terra. It was supposed to be a simple occupation of a lightly defended colony world. Instead, it became my introduction to the nightmare that is human warfare." Captain Morrison leaned forward slightly in his chair. Elena noticed that his hands had tensed into fists. "The planet had maybe 2 million human colonists," Zixtela continued. "Our intelligence said they had minimal military defenses and would likely evacuate when they saw our fleet approaching. We were wrong on both counts. What happened when you arrived?" They started shooting immediately, the commander said. Not with military weapons, but with everything they could find. Civilian ships tried to ram our destroyers. Mining equipment was turned into improvised cannons. Even children were firing hunting rifles at our landing craft. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Children? Human young ones who could not have been more than 12 or 13 years old, Zixtela confirmed. They manned anti-aircraft guns and threw explosive devices at our soldiers. When we captured some of them, they tried to bite through their own tongues rather than give us information. The recording device continued its steady hum as Elena processed this information. She had heard stories from human survivors, but hearing it from the alien perspective was different. How did this make you feel? She asked. Confused at first, Zixtela admitted, then horrified. In all my years of military service, I had never seen a species that would sacrifice their young ones for tactical advantage. Most civilized races surrender when their non-combatants are threatened. But humans didn't surrender? Never, the commander said with certainty. Not once during the entire war did a human military unit surrender while they still had ammunition. They fought until they ran out of weapons, then they fought with their bare hands. When they could no longer fight, they found ways to deny us strategic advantages even in death. Elena made more notes while Captain Morrison remained silent in his corner. The weight of the testimony was beginning to settle on everyone in the room. I need you to understand something, Zixtela said suddenly. Before the war, I was considered a brilliant tactical commander. I had won victories against species that were supposed to be unconquerable. But humans taught me that all my training was worthless against an enemy that views death as just another weapon. Can you give us a specific example? Elena asked. The siege of New Terra lasted 3 months, the commander replied. 3 months of fighting against people who should have been defeated in 3 days. By the end of it, half my officers were requesting transfers to other fronts. The other half were in medical treatment for psychological trauma. The interview room felt smaller somehow as Zixtela's words filled the space. Elena realized that she was documenting not just military history, but the psychological aftermath of a war that had changed both species forever. Tomorrow I will tell you about Colonel Amy Parker, Zixtela said quietly. She was the human commander who defended New Terra. What she did still haunts my dreams. The next morning, Elena Rodriguez found Commander Zixtela already waiting in the interview room. The alien commander sat motionless at the metal table with his 3 eyes staring at the recording device. His crystalline skin had taken on a darker hue that suggested he had not slept well. Are you ready to continue? Elena asked as she settled into her chair across from him. Captain Jake Morrison took his usual position in the corner of the room. I have been thinking about Colonel Amy Parker all night, Zixtela said without looking up. She was the human commander who turned New Terra into our first lesson about your species. Before I met her, I thought I understood warfare. Elena activated the recording device and pulled up her notes from the previous session. Tell me about the initial assault on New Terra. We arrived with overwhelming force, the commander began. 200 ships including 12 heavy cruisers and a planetary bombardment vessel. Our plan was simple. Destroy their orbital defenses, land troops at strategic points, and accept their surrender within 72 hours. What went wrong? Zixtela's 4 hands moved nervously on the table surface. Everything. The moment we entered the system, civilian ships began attacking our fleet. Not military vessels, but cargo haulers, passenger transports, even pleasure craft. They loaded themselves with explosives and flew straight at our largest ships. Elena made notes while trying to imagine the scene. How effective were these attacks? They destroyed 3 of our cruisers and damaged several others, the commander admitted. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was watching families die together. Parents and children in the same ship, choosing death over surrender. Captain. Morrison shifted in his chair but remained silent. Elena noticed his jaw was clenched tightly. When we finally reached the planet's surface, we found that every major city had been evacuated, Zixtela continued. But the humans had not fled. They had moved into the wilderness and underground tunnel systems. Colonel Parker had turned the entire planet into a fortress. What kind of defenses did she have? Nothing that should have worked against our technology, the commander said. Improvised weapons made from farming equipment, explosive devices. Built from mining supplies and communication systems that used the planet's own magnetic field. But she had something more dangerous than any weapon. What was that? She had soldiers who believed that dying for their world was better than living without it, Sixtela replied. Every human on that planet was willing to sacrifice themselves. To kill just one of our troops, Elena leaned forward. Can you give me a specific example? The commander's skin darkened further. Lieutenant Ben Carter. He was a young human soldier, maybe 25 years old. He was assigned to defend a bridge that connected two major valleys. When we attacked his position, he had 12 soldiers under his command. What happened? We hit them with everything we had. Plasma artillery, airstrikes, even chemical weapons. Within 2 hours, 11 of his soldiers were dead. Carter was badly wounded with burns covering half his body. His left arm was completely destroyed. Elena felt her stomach tighten. Did he surrender? He laughed, Sixtela said quietly. He actually laughed when our commander offered him medical treatment in exchange for surrender. Then he used his own blood to mark target coordinates on the bridge supports. I don't understand. He was calling artillery strikes on his own position? The commander explained. He knew human forces were watching from the hills. He painted targets with his blood so they would know exactly where to aim their remaining cannons. Captain Morrison stood up suddenly and walked to the window. Elena could see his reflection in the glass and noticed his hands were shaking. Carter held that bridge for 6 more hours, Sixtela continued. He used a damaged rifle that only fired single shots. Every time we tried to cross, he would kill at least one soldier before we could find cover. When we finally overran his position, we found him still firing with his rifle braced against a pile of our dead. Was he alive when you captured him? For a few minutes, the commander said. He looked at me with those strange human eyes and said something I will never forget. He said that for every human who died, 10 more would take their place. He said his death would inspire 1,000 others to fight harder. Elena made notes while processing the emotional weight of the story. Did his prediction come true? Within days, news of Carter's last stand had spread across the planet. Sixtela confirmed. Humans who had been hiding in the mountains came out to attack our supply lines. Civilians who had shown no interest in fighting began building bombs. Children as young as 12 started volunteering for suicide missions. How did this affect your troops? Many of my soldiers requested transfers to other battles, the commander admitted. They said fighting humans was different from fighting any other species. Most enemies become less effective when they suffer casualties. Humans become more dangerous. Elena looked up from her notes. What made Colonel Parker such an effective commander? She understood that humans do not fight the same way as other species, Sixtela replied. Most civilized races try to minimize casualties while achieving objectives. Parker maximized casualties on both sides because she knew dead humans would inspire living ones to fight harder. Can you explain what you mean? She would send small groups of soldiers to attack our positions knowing they would be killed, the commander said. But before they died, they would gather intelligence about our defenses and transmit it back to her. She treated her own soldiers like expendable tools for gathering information. Captain Morrison returned to his chair but did not sit down. Elena noticed he was staring at the floor. The most disturbing thing was how her soldiers responded to these orders, Sixtela continued. They volunteered for missions they knew were suicide. They competed for the chance to die for their cause. I began to understand that humans have a different relationship with death than other species. How so? For most civilized races, death is the ultimate defeat, the commander explained. For humans, death can be another form of victory. They use their deaths as weapons against their enemies. Elena felt a chill run through the room. How long did the siege last? 3 months, Sixtela said. 3 months of fighting against people who should have been defeated in 3 days. By the end, we had lost more ships and soldiers than in any previous campaign. And we only won because we were willing to destroy the entire planet from orbit. What happened to Colonel Parker? She died in the final bombardment, the commander replied. But even in death, she achieved a victory. Word of New Terra's resistance spread throughout human space. Every other colony began preparing for siege, warfare using her tactics. The recording device continued its steady hum as Elena processed the implications of what she had heard. How did this change your approach to fighting humans? It made us realize that this war would not end quickly, Zixtela said. And it taught us that humans are willing to pay any price for victory, even if that price is their own extinction. Elena Rodriguez entered the interview room to find Commander Zixtela staring at his reflection in the metal table. The alien's crystalline skin had taken on an almost black coloration that she had not seen before. His forearms were wrapped around his torso in what appeared to be a protective gesture. "Commander," she said gently as she took her seat. "Are you ready to continue?" Zixtela's 3 eyes focused on her slowly. "Today I must tell you about the most terrifying human trait of all, your species' willingness to sacrifice everything for strategic advantage." Captain Jake Morrison entered the room and took his usual position by the window. Elena noticed he looked more tense than usual as he settled into his chair. "Yesterday you told us about individual acts of sacrifice," Elena said as she activated the recording device. "What changed after New Terra?" "The humans began to think bigger," Zixtela replied. "They stopped seeing individual deaths as losses and started seeing them as investments. General Rick Thompson was the first to show us what this meant." "Tell me about General Thompson." The commander's skin darkened further. "He commanded the human fleet defending the Proxima system. Intelligence reports said he had 40 ships against our force of 200. Any reasonable commander would have retreated or negotiated surrender terms. But he didn't. He attacked immediately," Zixtela said. "His entire fleet charged straight at our battle line with no apparent strategy. We destroyed them completely within 6 hours. I remember thinking the humans had finally lost their minds." Elena made notes while waiting for the commander to continue. She could sense there was more to this story. 2 days later we learned the truth," Zixtela said quietly. "Thompson had equipped every ship in his fleet with advanced recording equipment. They documented our battle formations, weapon capabilities, and tactical responses. All of this data was transmitted to Earth before the ships were destroyed. So the sacrifice had a purpose? The information allowed human forces to defeat our fleets in 12 subsequent battles," the commander confirmed. "Thompson killed his own people to gather intelligence that saved millions of other humans. The cost was 40 ships and 15,000 lives. The benefit was victory in an entire sector." Captain Morrison shifted in his chair. Elena glanced at him and noticed his hands were clenched into fists. "This was when we began to understand that humans think differently about acceptable losses," Zixtela continued. "Most species will sacrifice individuals to save the group. Humans will sacrifice entire groups to save the species." "Can you give me another example?" The commander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Lisa Morgan was a human scientist who specialized in alien biology. She had been studying our species for years before the war began. What did she do? She volunteered to be infected with a deadly pathogen that targeted our respiratory systems, Zixtela said. Then she allowed herself to be captured during a raid on a human research station. Elena felt her stomach drop. She infected herself deliberately? "The pathogen was designed to be dormant for 72 hours, the commander explained. Long enough for her to be processed through our medical facilities and interrogated by our intelligence officers. She died in our custody exactly as planned. Then, the pathogen began to spread through our biofilters, Zixtela said. It had been modified to attack the specific atmospheric processors our species uses. Within a week, 3 of our major fleets were unable to maintain life support systems. Elena stopped taking notes and stared at the alien commander. She killed herself to spread a disease? She killed herself to cripple our military capacity, he corrected. The pathogen was not designed to kill us directly. It was designed to force us to rebuild our entire life support infrastructure. Dr. Morgan delayed our war effort by 8 months with her death. Captain Morrison stood up and walked to the window. Elena could see his reflection and noticed he was smiling slightly. But the most disturbing example was Captain Tony Walsh, Zixtela continued. He led a special forces team that infiltrated one of our major supply depots. How did they manage to penetrate your security? The commander's skin turned almost completely black. They hid inside the corpses of their own dead soldiers. Walsh and his team spent 18 hours floating in space inside hollowed-out human bodies. Elena felt sick. That's impossible. How could they survive? They used modified breathing apparatus and emergency life support systems, Zixtela explained. The dead bodies provided protection from radiation and made them invisible to our sensors. When we collected the battlefield debris, we brought them directly into our most secure facility. What happened then? They emerged from the corpses and destroyed the entire depot, the commander said. Millions of tons of supplies and equipment were lost. But the psychological impact was worse than the material damage. How so? My soldiers began to fear every piece of battlefield debris, Zixtela admitted. They would spend hours examining dead bodies to make sure they were actually dead. Some troops refused to clean up after battles because they thought the corpses might contain hidden enemies. Elena made notes while trying to process the implications. Did human forces use this tactic again? Many times, the commander confirmed. We found hidden soldiers in destroyed vehicles, damaged equipment, even inside the bodies of dead animals. Humans began to see every object on a battlefield as a potential weapon or hiding place. How did this change your military procedures? We had to completely rebuild our security protocols, Zixtela said. Every piece of debris had to be scanned multiple times. Bodies had to be cremated immediately. The time required for these procedures slowed our advance by weeks in every campaign. Captain Morrison returned to his seat. Elena noticed his expression had changed from tension to something that looked almost like pride. The worst part was not knowing what humans were capable of, the commander continued. Every day brought new horrors. Soldiers who had been fighting for years began to break down mentally. They could not predict what humans would do next. Give me an example. We captured a human supply convoy that appeared to be carrying medical supplies, Zixtela said. Our doctors were excited to study human medical technology. When they opened the containers, they found explosives disguised as medicine bottles. A trap? Worse than a trap, the commander replied. The explosives were designed to spread a chemical agent that would make our soldiers violently ill, but not kill them. Sick soldiers require more resources than dead ones. The humans were trying to drain our medical supplies. Elena looked up from her notes. It sounds like humans were always thinking several steps ahead. That was exactly the problem, Zixtela confirmed. Human commanders like Thompson and Walsh were not just fighting the current battle. They were fighting battles that would happen months or years in the future. Every action was designed to create advantages for later conflicts. How did this affect your troops mentally? Many of my officers began to question every decision, the commander admitted. They would spend hours trying to figure out hidden purposes behind human actions. Some became paralyzed by the complexity of fighting, an enemy that turned everything into a weapon, including their own deaths. Especially their own deaths, Zixtela said. We learned that killing humans was often exactly what they wanted us to do. Their deaths served purposes we could not understand until it was too late. The recording device continued its steady hum as Elena processed the weight of these revelations. How did this change your view of humanity? It made us realize that we were not fighting a normal war, the commander replied. We were fighting a species that had weaponized the concept of sacrifice itself. When Elena Rodriguez arrived at the interview room, she found Commander Zixtela sitting in complete darkness. The alien had turned off all the lights and was staring at the wall with his three eyes glowing faintly in the shadows. His crystalline skin had taken on a dull gray color that she had never seen before. "Commander?" Elena said as she activated the room's lighting system. "Are you all right?" "I was remembering Kepler Station," Zixtela replied without moving. "Sometimes I think they are still there, hiding in the walls, waiting for the right moment to strike." Captain Jake Morrison entered the room and immediately noticed the alien's distressed state. He exchanged a concerned glance with Elena before taking his usual seat by the window. "What happened at Kepler Station?" Elena asked as she activated the recording device. "It was supposed to be our greatest victory," the commander said slowly. "A massive human mining platform that we captured early in the war. The station had strategic value because it controlled the asteroid belt mining operations for 3 star systems." "How did you capture it?" "The humans evacuated most of their personnel when our fleet arrived," Zixtela explained. "We expected them to destroy the station rather than let us have it, but they didn't. We thought they had made a strategic error." Elena made notes while waiting for the commander to continue. She could sense that this story would be different from the others. "The station was enormous," Zixtela continued. "It had living quarters for 50,000 people, industrial facilities, and a complex network of maintenance tunnels. We moved in 5,000 of our best troops to secure it." "What went wrong?" "Nothing went wrong at first," the commander said. "For 2 weeks, our occupation proceeded normally. We began converting the mining equipment for our own use. Our engineers started modifying the life support systems. Everything seemed perfect." Captain Morrison leaned forward in his chair. Elena noticed his expression had changed from concern to interest. "Then the accident started," Zixtela said quietly. "Small things at first. Equipment would malfunction at critical moments. Power systems would fail in specific sections. Computer networks would crash for no apparent reason. Sabotage? We thought so, but we could not find any evidence," the commander admitted. "Our security team searched the entire station multiple times. They found nothing. No hidden explosives, no unauthorized personnel, no signs of tampering." "But the problems continued?" "They got worse," Zixtela confirmed. "Elevators would stop working between floors, trapping soldiers for hours. Environmental systems would create dangerous gas buildups in certain areas. Food processors would produce meals that made our troops sick." Elena looked up from her notes. "How did your troops react?" "They became nervous," the commander said. "Soldiers who had fought in major battles began to jump at small noises. They would check their equipment multiple times before using it. Some refused to enter certain sections of the station alone." "Did you discover what was causing these problems?" "Not for 8 months," Zixtela replied. 8 months of slowly escalating incidents that drove my troops to the edge of mental breakdown. We began to think the station was cursed by some kind of human technology we didn't understand." Captain Morrison stood up and walked to the window. Elena could see his reflection in the glass and noticed he was smiling slightly. "The truth was much worse than any curse," the commander continued. "Engineer Matt Sullivan had rigged the station's maintenance systems before the evacuation. He had created a network of hidden passages and secret chambers throughout the entire structure." "Hidden passages?" "Between the walls, under the floors, above the ceilings," Zixtela explained. "Sullivan had spent months preparing the station for occupation. He knew exactly where our troops would be positioned and how they would try to secure the facility." "But the humans had evacuated?" "Most of them had evacuated," the commander corrected. "But 200 volunteers had stayed behind under the command of Dr. Nina Foster. They had been living inside the station's walls like ghosts, watching our every move." Elena felt a chill run through the room. "For 8 months?" "For 8 months they survived in spaces so small that most of our soldiers could not have fit inside them," Zixtela confirmed. "They had emergency supplies, waste disposal systems, and communication networks that we never detected." "How did They avoid your security sweeps? They moved through the maintenance tunnels whenever we searched, the commander explained. The station was so large that they could always stay ahead of our troops. They knew every passage, every hiding place, every blind spot in our security system. What were they doing during this time? Psychological warfare, Zixtela said. They would sabotage our equipment in ways that looked like accidents. They would create noises in the walls that made our soldiers think they were going insane. They would leave small signs that humans had been present, then vanish before we could find them. Elena made detailed notes while trying to imagine the psychological impact on the alien troops. Can you give me specific examples? Soldiers would find their personal belongings moved slightly while they slept, the commander said. Food would disappear from sealed containers. Messages would appear on computer screens for a few seconds before vanishing. Our troops began to believe that dead humans were haunting the station. How did Dr. Foster coordinate these activities? She had turned the station's own systems against us, Zixtela explained. The maintenance computers, the environmental controls, even the lighting systems were all connected to her hidden network. She could monitor our activities and coordinate attacks from anywhere in the station. Captain Morrison returned to his seat but remained standing. Elena noticed his hands were no longer clenched into fists. The worst incident happened in month 6, the commander continued. A squad of 12 soldiers was checking the mining equipment when the artificial gravity failed in that section. They floated helplessly while hidden humans used the stations. Cargo handling systems to crush them. They used the station itself as a weapon? The entire station was a weapon, Zixtela confirmed. Every system, every piece of equipment, every room was designed to kill us. Dr. Foster had turned a mining platform into the most sophisticated trap in military history. How did you finally discover the truth? We didn't, the commander admitted. They revealed themselves. On the 8th month anniversary of our occupation, every hidden human emerged from the walls simultaneously. They had coordinated the timing perfectly. What happened then? They detonated charges they had been placing throughout the stations. Support structure, Zixtela said. The entire facility began to collapse. Dr. Foster's final message was broadcast on every communication channel in the system. What did she say? She said that humans would never let us keep what we had stolen, the commander replied. She said that every victory against humanity would come with a price we could not afford to pay. Elena stopped taking notes and stared at the alien commander. Did any of the humans survive? None of them, Zixtela confirmed. All 200 volunteers died in the collapse. But they succeeded in destroying the station and killing 3,000 of our troops. How did this affect your military operations? We began to fear every facility we captured, the commander admitted. Our engineers would spend weeks searching for hidden passages and secret systems. We would assign extra troops to guard empty rooms just in case. The paranoia spread through our entire military. Did you find similar traps in other locations? Sometimes, Zixtela said. But the fear was always there. Every creaking sound, every equipment malfunction, every unexplained incident made our soldiers think that dead humans were still fighting us. The recording device continued its steady hum as Elena processed the implications of this story. How did this change your view of human warfare? It taught us that humans could turn any location into a battlefield, the commander replied. Even in death, even in defeat, they found ways to continue fighting. We realized that occupying human territory would never be safe. Elena Rodriguez found Commander Zixtela sitting perfectly still when she entered the interview room. The alien's crystalline skin had turned completely transparent, revealing the dark fluid that served as his blood flowing through visible channels beneath the surface. His 4 arms lay motionless on the table and his 3 eyes stared at nothing. Commander? Elena said softly as she took her seat. We don't have to continue if you're not ready. Today I must tell you about the end, Zixtela whispered. About what your species did when they knew they were going to die. About the moment when we realized that victory over humans was the most terrible defeat imaginable. Captain Jake Morrison entered the room and immediately sensed the heavy atmosphere. He moved quietly to his chair by the window and sat down without speaking. "The final assault on Earth," Elena said as she activated the recording device. "Tell me what happened." "We arrived with the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history," the commander began. 5,000 ships, including planetary bombardment vessels capable of cracking continents. High Command had decided that humanity needed to be completely eliminated. Why was that decision made? "Because we had learned that humans could not be conquered," Zixtela replied. "Every victory against your species came with costs that made the victory meaningless. The coalition leadership decided that coexistence was impossible." Elena made notes while processing the weight of what she was hearing. "What did you expect to find when you reached Earth?" "Surrender," the commander said. "Simply, we thought that facing complete extinction, humans would finally accept defeat. We prepared for lengthy negotiations about terms of surrender and relocation to reservation worlds. But that's not what happened. Admiral Kate Harrison was waiting for us with a defense fleet of 800 ships," Zixtela continued. "Our intelligence said it was everything humanity had left. We outnumbered them more than 6-1. Captain Morrison shifted in his chair. Elena noticed his hands were gripping the armrests tightly. Admiral Harrison opened communications the moment. "We entered the system," the commander said. "She transmitted a message that chilled every officer on our command ship." "What did she say?" "She said that humans had always known this day would come," Zixtela replied. "She said that her people had spent 4 years preparing for their final battle. Then she said something that made no sense at the time." "What was that?" "She said that humanity's greatest victory would be achieved in defeat," the commander continued. "She said that by destroying Earth, we would create something far more dangerous than any human military force." Elena looked up from her notes. "What did she mean?" "We didn't understand until it was too late," Zixtela admitted. "We thought she was trying to use psychological warfare to make us hesitate. So we began the attack immediately." "Describe the battle." The commander's transparent skin began to darken as he recalled the memories. It was unlike anything we had ever seen. Human ships didn't retreat when they were damaged. They accelerated toward our vessels and used their own reactors as weapons. Suicide. "Attacks? More than suicide attacks," Zixtela corrected. "They had modified their reactor cores to create maximum damage when they exploded. A single human destroyer could cripple one of our heavy cruisers by ramming it at full speed." "How effective was this tactic?" "We lost 300 ships in the first hour," the commander admitted. "But the psychological impact was worse than the material losses. Our crews had never faced enemies who treated their own deaths as ammunition." Captain Morrison stood up and walked to the window. Elena could see his reflection and noticed tears in his eyes. "The most disturbing part was the coordination," Zixtela continued. "Human ships would sacrifice themselves at precise moments to create openings for other vessels. They had turned their entire fleet into a single weapon aimed at our destruction." "How long did the space battle last?" 6 hours, the commander replied. 6 hours of fighting against people who had already accepted that they were going to die. By the end, both fleets were completely destroyed." "Both fleets?" "Admiral Harrison had achieved the impossible," Zixtela confirmed. "With 800 ships, she had eliminated our entire attack force. Only a few dozen vessels on each side remained functional." Elena stopped taking notes and stared at the alien commander. "How was that possible?" "Human ships carried weapons that should not have existed," he explained. "They had stripped the defensive systems from their vessels and replaced them with experimental weapons that killed the crew when fired. They built weapons that killed their own people. They built weapons that required human sacrifice to function." Zixtela corrected. "Devices that used the life force of the crew to power energy beams capable of destroying our largest ships. Why would they create such things?" "Because they knew they were going to die anyway," the commander said quietly. "They chose to make their deaths as destructive as possible." Captain Morrison returned to his seat. Elena noticed his face was pale and his hands were shaking. When the space battle ended, we still had enough ships to bombard the planet, Zixtela continued. But President Don Mitchell transmitted a message that every surviving crew member heard. What did he say? He said that Earth's children had already been evacuated to distant colonies, the commander replied. He said that humanity would survive even if their homeworld died. Then he said something that haunts me still. Tell me. He said that we could kill every human in the galaxy, but we could never make them kneel, Zixtela whispered. He said that the story of Earth's final battle would inspire humans for thousands of years to come. What happened next? Dr. Alex Chun, their chief scientist, activated an experimental weapon that created a temporary wormhole, the commander continued. The remaining civilians on Earth were evacuated to secret colonies while the planet's surface burned. The planet was destroyed? Completely, Zixtela confirmed. We used our most powerful weapons to crack the continents and boil the oceans. Nothing could have survived the bombardment. Elena made notes while trying to process the scale of destruction. So the coalition won? We thought we had won, the commander said. We celebrated the elimination of humanity and prepared to return home as heroes. But Admiral Harrison's prediction came true within months. What do you mean? Word of Earth's final battle spread throughout the galaxy, Zixtela explained. Other species began to question why the mighty coalition needed 5,000 ships to defeat 800 human vessels. How did this affect the coalition? Everything changed, the commander admitted. Species that had been our allies began to fear what we might do to them. Worlds that had willingly joined the coalition started building defensive fleets. Because of how you destroyed humanity? Because humanity had shown the galaxy that the coalition could be fought, Zixtela replied. Even in death, even in complete defeat, humans had achieved a strategic victory. Captain Morrison leaned forward in his chair. Elena noticed he was smiling despite the tears on his face. The worst part was the psychological impact on our own forces, the commander continued. Half of our officers requested immediate medical retirement. The other half became obsessed with finding hidden human colonies. Were there hidden colonies? We never found any, Zixtela said. But the fear that they existed paralyzed our military for years. Every unexplained incident, every equipment failure, every strategic setback was blamed on surviving humans. How did this change the coalition? It destroyed us from within, the commander admitted. We had become the species that committed genocide against enemies who refused to surrender. Our own people began to see us as monsters. The recording device continued its steady hum as Elena processed the implications. Do you regret what happened? Every day, Zixtela replied. We learned too late that defeating humans was impossible. Even when we killed them all, they continued to win. Elena Rodriguez arrived at the interview room to find Commander Zixtela standing at the window looking out at the stars. His crystalline skin had returned to its normal translucent state, but she could see stress fractures running through the surface like scars. He turned when she entered, and she noticed that one of his 3 eyes had stopped moving independently. This is our final session, Elena said as she took her seat at the metal table. How are you feeling? Empty, Zixtela replied as he moved slowly back to his chair. Telling these stories has been like bleeding poison from an old wound. Necessary but painful. Captain Jake Morrison entered the room, and Elena noticed immediately that something was different about him. His uniform was slightly different, and he carried himself with more authority than she remembered. Before we begin, Elena said as she activated the recording device, I want to ask you about the aftermath of the war. How did the coalition military handle what had happened? We tried to pretend it was a normal victory, the commander said. Official reports described the elimination of a dangerous enemy threat. Medals were awarded and promotions were given to surviving officers. But that wasn't the whole truth? The whole truth was that our military had suffered a complete psychological breakdown, Zixtela admitted. Within 6 months of returning home, 60% of the officers who had fought humans were in medical treatment for trauma disorders. Elena made notes while glancing occasionally at Captain Morrison. Something about his presence felt different. Today, what kind of symptoms were they experiencing? Nightmares about human tactics, the commander replied. Panic attacks when equipment malfunctioned. Paranoid delusions about hidden human survivors. Some officers became unable to function in normal military situations. How did the coalition leadership respond? They were forced to completely restructure our military doctrine, Zixtela explained. New regulations required psychological evaluation of enemy species before any military engagement. The goal was to avoid fighting another species like humanity. Captain Morrison moved from his usual position by the window to a chair closer to the table. Elena found this change in routine unsettling. Did you personally experience these psychological effects? Elena asked. I was one of the worst cases, the commander admitted. For 2 years after the war, I could not sleep without medication. Every sound in my quarters made me think that dead humans were coming for revenge. What kind of treatment did you receive? Memory suppression therapy, Zixtela replied. Coalition medical officers tried to remove or alter my memories of human warfare tactics. The treatment was partially successful but left me with gaps in my recollection. Elena looked up from her notes. Is that why you agreed to these interviews? To recover your memories? Partly, the commander said. But also because I believe the galaxy needs to understand what happened. The official coalition records are incomplete and misleading. Captain Morrison leaned forward in his chair. Elena noticed for the first time that his eyes were a different color than she remembered. What do the official records say? Elena asked. They describe humanity as a primitive species that was eliminated due to their refusal to accept civilized surrender terms, Zixtela replied. They make no mention of human tactical innovations or the psychological impact on coalition forces. Why? Would they hide that information? Because admitting the truth would mean acknowledging that we had been defeated by a supposedly inferior species, the commander explained. Coalition pride could not accept that humans had fundamentally changed our understanding of warfare. Elena made more notes while trying to process the implications. Do you think other species in the galaxy know the real story? Some do, Zixtela confirmed. Rumors and fragments of truth have spread despite official censorship. That is why. Several worlds have left the coalition since the war ended. Captain Morrison stood up and walked to the recording device. Elena watched in confusion as he began examining the equipment. What are you doing, Captain? Elena asked. Making sure this conversation is being properly documented, he replied. His voice had changed slightly, and Elena realized with shock that it was not the same person who had been attending the previous sessions. I don't understand, Elena said as she stood up from her chair. The man who had been posing as Captain Morrison smiled and removed a small device from his uniform pocket. Dr. Rodriguez, allow me to introduce myself properly. I am General Sarah Kim of the Human Colonial Defense Force. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. Humans are extinct. That is what we wanted the galaxy to believe. General Kim replied. The truth is that several human colonies survived the war by remaining hidden. We have been watching the coalition's activities ever since. Commander Zixtela's 3 eyes widened in shock. You are human? You have been here the entire time? I have been monitoring these interviews from the beginning, General Kim confirmed. We needed to understand how much the coalition leadership knows about surviving human populations. Elena sat back down heavily. How many humans are still alive? Enough, General Kim said simply. Dr. Chun's wormhole evacuation was more successful than the coalition realized. Thousands of human children were transported to distant colonies that remain undiscovered. Why are you revealing this now? Zixtela asked. Because, Commander, your testimony has convinced us that not all coalition officers are our enemies, General Kim replied. Your obvious trauma and regret suggest that reconciliation might be possible. Elena looked back and forth between the alien commander and the human general. What does this mean for the peace process? It means that the war is not over, General, Kim said, but it also means that it doesn't have to continue. Hidden human colonies have been preparing for renewed conflict, but we would prefer to find another solution. Commander Zixtella's crystalline skin began to change color rapidly. The coalition leadership believes humanity is extinct. If they discover the truth, they will launch another extermination campaign, which is why we need allies within the coalition military, General Kim explained. Officers who understand the true cost of fighting humans and who might be willing to work toward peace. What are you asking of me? The commander said. We are asking you to help us prevent another war, General Kim replied. Your testimony shows that you understand what happens when civilized species try to eliminate humanity through force. Elena realized that her role in documenting these interviews had been part of a larger plan. You've been using me to evaluate coalition officers. We needed to know if any coalition leaders could be trusted, General Kim confirmed. Commander Zixtella's willingness to honestly describe his experiences suggests that he might be one of them. The recording device continued its steady hum. As the three beings sat in silence processing the implications of this revelation. If I help you, Zixtella said slowly, I will be committing treason against the coalition. If you don't help us, General Kim replied, you may be dooming both our species to another war that will destroy us all. Elena watched as the alien commander struggled with his decision. What would you need me to do? Return to coalition space. And begin quietly identifying other officers who might support peace negotiations, General Kim explained. Help us build a coalition within your military that understands the real cost of fighting humans. And if I refuse? Then you will return to your people with the knowledge that humans still exist, General Kim said. What you choose to do with that information will be up to you. Commander Zixtella stood up slowly and walked to the window. His reflection in the glass showed a being who looked far older than when the interviews had begun. I have seen what happens when my people fight yours, he said quietly. I have watched the strongest warriors in the galaxy break down mentally after facing human determination. I cannot be responsible for causing that suffering again. Does that mean you will help us? Elena asked. It means I will try, Zixtella replied. Not because I believe in your cause, but because I believe in preventing unnecessary death, General Kim nodded respectfully. That is all we can ask. The commander turned from the window to face them both. But I want something in return. What? I want humanity to promise that if war comes again, you will remember that not all coalition officers are your enemies, Zixtella said. Some of us learn from our mistakes. We will remember, General Kim promised. Elena realized that she had witnessed something historic. What happens now? Now we begin the difficult work of building peace between species that have every reason to hate each other, General Kim replied. And we hope that the lessons learned from this war will prevent the next one. The recording device clicked off as the interview session ended, but Elena knew that the real conversation was just beginning.